welcome to today's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. I'm your host, Louis Padian. I hope that you're doing well and are enjoying the podcast and the topics we've covered so far. These podcasts are released every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, so be sure to subscribe wherever you are listening to be kept up to date. So today we'll be starting another short mini-series on carbohydrates, and they often get a bad rap or blamed for a lot of things, and basically, in my opinion, are misunderstood. So today's episode will be covering specifically what are carbohydrates, or carbs as they're commonly known. What do carbs actually do? And do you really need carbohydrates in your diet in order to live a healthy and happy life? But first things first, I think it's important to understand what actually are carbs or carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are one of the primary macronutrients. We refer to them alongside fats, proteins, and as I've said in the past, technically alcohol might fall in that sort of group as well. And carbs are crucial for supporting various bodily functions and providing us with energy, which is probably the thing that they're most known for. Carbs consist of groups or a few different sugars, including ones that you might have heard of: glucose, fructose, sucrose, or anything that ends in that OSE or that O's. And these sugars serve as the body's primary source of energy and are essential for brain function, muscle movement, and just overall well-being. When we look at carbohydrates, we can split them into two main groups. So we've got simple and complex. These are things you might have heard of: complex carbs or simple carbs. And when we have a look at them, we break them down into simple carbs, broken down and absorbed by the body quite easily, quite quickly. And I would refer to them as a more readily available form of energy. And when we're thinking about simple carbs, we think of things like fruit, honey, table sugar, maple syrup, dried fruits, fruit juices, and then the other things are like sweets and maybe sugary drinks. Now, when we look at complex carbohydrates, they are broken down a bit more slowly into the body and absorbed a bit more slowly, so have a bit more of a gradual effect on our blood sugar levels. And what I would refer to as a more sustained and gradual supply of energy compared to the simple carbohydrates. And when we look at complex carbs, we think of things like whole grains in particular, legumes, vegetables, and maybe stuff like whole wheat bread, brown rice, or whole wheat pasta. Now, one of the complex carbohydrates that I think deserves a special mention is fiber. So this is a complex carbohydrate, but it's a type of complex carb that cannot be fully digested or only digested partially by the body. But fiber is such a fascinating part of food and is really important for people to know about. And I've found with clients in particular, get huge results by just focusing on this and increasing this if we can. But it deserves its own episode or even its own mini series. So I'll be covering that in a bit more depth later on. So that is what carbs are. So what do they do? So as I said, energy. Carbohydrates are the main source of energy for the body. They're broken down to glucose, which you might have heard of, which is used by our cells within our bodies for energy. Second would be blood sugar regulation. So carbohydrates help regulate your blood sugars. When we eat, the carbs get broken down, absorbed into the body, go into our blood, and that's where we get our blood sugars. And then our body sort of releases insulin and helps our body or our cells absorb the glucose from the blood, and this sort of helps regulate that function and has a nice little store as well within our muscles and within our liver. So another thing that it does is it helps with cell structure actually. So we're actually looking at the cellular level of our bodies. All cells within plants and animals have cell walls which carbohydrates help form. They help with things like DNA, RNA, and processes within our cells as well. So not only do they have an abundance of energy, but actually when we look at the really small parts of cells, they play a crucial role within that as well. And as I've said, fiber, gut health, something that's an emerging sort of field at the moment, but it plays an important role for our gut health, our bowel movements, and keeping us full. So this is why I think it deserves its own episode. But it's a super important part of food and is an important part of carbohydrates in general, that fiber element, linking to gut health, bowel movements, digestive health in general, and also helping that fullness and satiety levels as well. So with that, it's important to ask the question, like, do we actually need carbs? And yes, we spoke about the energy part as well. And when we look at the energy of the three main macronutrients, we've got protein, carbs, and fat. So protein is broken down and it gives us 4 calories per gram. Carbohydrates also gives us 4 calories per gram, and fat, slightly more energy dense, as 9 calories per gram. But one of the main arguments that it comes to whether we need carbs, and the low carbohydrate / keto group may sort of use as an argument saying, well, why you should go low carb, is that actually when we look at the 3 main groups, protein, fats and carbs, we have essential fatty acids. That essential means that our body can't produce them, therefore we need to get them from our diet, and that's sort of our omega-3s. When we look at protein, mention it on the protein series, that protein is broken down into amino acids, and some of those amino acids are essential as well, or 9 of them are, and that means our body can't produce them, and then we need to get them through our diet. There aren't any essential carbohydrates, which means that we can survive without them. And that's typically the argument for people is, well, there's essential fatty acids, there's essential proteins, but there's no essential carbs, so therefore we don't actually need them. They're a nice thing to have, but we don't need them. And my counter argument would be that just because you can doesn't mean that you should. And also that surviving isn't thriving. Yes, we can survive without lots of things, or we can get by without lots of things, but actually if you want to thrive, then carbohydrates, in my opinion, should play a part in that. They're a key part of that process. And for anyone who's done low carb, which I myself include, or keto, that you start the diet and there may be some benefits, like you'll drop weight quite quickly, which we'll discuss on the next episode, but it's a real struggle. You are not on your A game for first couple of days, first week or so. It's real struggle, and you are definitely not thriving. So why would you put yourself through that? And some people might say it's better for weight loss, but we'll dive into that because it's a really big topic and there's a lot of misunderstanding around that on the next episode. If you're not having carbohydrates or not having enough carbohydrates, or the sort of common symptoms you might see people go low carbohydrates, or things that I found was fatigue was unreal. You just felt so low on energy, weakness as well. So if you're looking at performance in the gym or performance at work or in a sporting environment, that you're just not as strong as you should be, or you feel that you should be. Lightheadedness and dizziness is, again, not ideal. That's something that we want to try and avoid. Headaches might be another one as well. Constipation, that lack of fiber in the diet that we tend to see that people tend to ignore when they're having that keto or that low carbohydrate approach. That constipation and bowel movements are really negatively affected by that as well. And difficulty concentrating. You just tend to zone out. You feel so low on energy, so weak, dizziness, headaches, that you just don't tend to stay on task or can focus or do difficult mental tasks very well. So we've covered today the basics and understanding, and I think it was really important to cover these aspects. They may not be the most exciting, but they really do help with the foundations of understanding benefits of carbohydrates, because often they are feared within diets. So today we've covered things like what actually is a carbohydrate and how to recognize when you're looking at the back of food labels, certain words, glucose, fructose, maltose, these are all carbohydrates. What carbs actually do and the roles they perform within the body, and the importance of fiber, and then sort of links into our complex carb and simple carbohydrates and how we can split those up. And then, in my opinion, do you really need carbohydrates? And the initial answer might be, for people looking at the labeling of certain foods, saying actually it's not essential. We've got essential fats, we've got essential proteins, but we haven't got essential carbs, therefore they are not essential. But actually, yes, we can survive without, but really, would you want to? Not even just from a survival perspective and performance perspective, but enjoyment. Food enjoyment is a huge part of this as well. So do you really need carbohydrates? I'd say most people would benefit from having a good portion of the diet coming from carbohydrates and a variety of them, but there is a bit of nuance to that as well. The next episode will be covering stuff around weight loss, diving a lot more deeper into that, because there's a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of half-truths that the low carbohydrate crowd or keto crowd will try and sell you on. But for now, I think we've given you a good introduction, and we should cover more on the next episode. So there you have it. Thank you very much for listening to today's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. If you have any questions, queries, or would like to reach out to me, please do. I am at Louis Padian Nutrition, which is at LOUISPADIAN Nutrition on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and all other social media platforms. If you're looking for support in achieving your goals and living a healthier, happier, and more balanced life in the process, click the link below and inquire about working with me. Remember to subscribe to the Balanced Approach podcast wherever you're listening for more insightful episodes, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.